Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I know you're probably dancing and prancing to get to continue our reading and discussion of this very revealing book. Very revealing book. It's entitled The Global Vatican. The Global Vatican. And it gives us an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. Should the United States be politically or any otherwise encumbered by the Antichrist of the Bible, the papacy? The answer from Inquisition Update is a flat no, but the government of the world doesn't listen to me. It listens to the papacy, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the self-styled King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We're talking about the early events leading to what later became known as the United States of America and the role that Charles Carroll and the entire Carroll family played. Roman Catholics all, members and citizens of the colonial colony named after the Virgin Mary, the only Roman Catholic colony in existence at that time, Maryland. John Carroll, the Jesuit priest, the cousin of Charles Carroll of Carrollton, was beyond being the first bishop of the Roman Catholic Church, the American Roman Catholic Church, John Carroll was also instrumental in fomenting the Revolutionary War. John Carroll, the consummate Jesuit priest, the consummate oath-spitting Jesuit priest. Oh, by the way, I hope my listeners took some time this weekend to read the extreme oath of the Jesuits, as I suggested on the program Friday, and you'll understand what motivated Charles and John and Daniel Carroll. They were all Jesuit trained. Could be technically justified in saying that they were all three Jesuits, although so far as we know, John is the only one that took the oath. But certainly Charles and Daniel were instrumental with John to help shape the founding of our country and to shape the founding of our federal government. Now, we concluded in some comments about Charles Carroll last time. We'll back up for continuity purposes. The first full paragraph on page 39, if you're following along in the book. It says, Charles Carroll was still robust 6 years later in 1831 when the French traveler Alexis de Tocqueville visited him. De Tocqueville was delighted to meet this living, breathing relic of American history and found Charles Carroll to be a man of intelligence and culture. His feelings for Carroll might well have influenced the long passage de Tocqueville later included in his classic Democracy in America, in which he described American Catholics as, quote, fervent and zealous in the belief of their doctrines, unquote, and yet, quote, the most Republican and most Democratic class in the United States, unquote. Now, de Tocqueville's assessment notwithstanding, anti-Catholicism was already sweeping through the country by the time Charles Carroll died at 95 on November 14th, 1832. Catholic immigrants started arriving in large numbers from Ireland and Germany. Now, why were there so many Catholics coming? Because there was an unholy alliance between the papacy, the Jesuits, and the monarchical families, the monarchs of Europe, who had been basically unseated by both the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution. They had lost their control. And it was due largely to the example set by America. Democracy. The people govern. And they decided that it was important for their survival and the continuation of the old world order, or the restoration of the old world order, where the Pope ruled and the monarchs ruled and benefited from their relationship with the papacy, that they worked to make America Catholic and to overthrow Protestantism, because it was Protestantism that liberated the people. So they set about a plan, a multifaceted plan, to Catholicize the United States of America. And immigration was one of their great hopes. that every Irishman or every German who was Roman Catholic, no matter his position in life, whether he be a criminal or a baker or a banker, they could come to this country and have an equal vote with Protestants. So it was necessary for the Roman Catholic Church and the monarchies to, well, support the immigration of Roman Catholics. Because in America, they had equal voice with Protestants. Now, it became recognized in the United States that Catholics were flooding into the country, and suspicions naturally rose. You know, the greatest of all evils to be feared, Roman Catholicism, popery. Every Roman Catholic to a Protestant representative of the Pope, and an overthrow of our democratic government and a return to monarchism, popery. So there was much said and written and preached from the Protestant pulpits of this country. He says, to nativists, that is, native colonists, these immigrants, Roman Catholics, seemed alien and menacing, soldiers on the front lines of an obedient papal army that intended to conquer America. Such sentiments were fanned by groups like the American Tract Society, founded in 1825, which published anti-Catholic pamphlets. Several popular and scurrilous books published in the 1830s, including 6 Months in a Convent and Awful Disclosures of the Hotel Dieu Nunnery in Montreal, all fueled to the fire, okay? Added fuel to the fire. Now, I haven't read either one of those books here on Inquisition Update, but the gist is that these nunneries and convents of the Roman Catholic Church were nothing but brothels for the popes and the priests, and money raisers, laundries, and one thing and another. So they were houses of corruption, and they became corrupt because, number one, they serve a corrupt system to start with. Celibate priests mixing with nuns, cloistered nuns, where cops and police are not allowed to enter because they're asylums for the papacy. They're sacrosanct. The threshold of a nunnery cannot be breached by the civil power without the Pope's permission. Okay, so you can think of each one as an embassy, closed walls. What goes on inside is not known to the outside world. And we have many legitimate, now this author calls these illegitimate works, but there are many, many legitimate exposés of what goes on in these nunneries written by Roman Catholics themselves. So the assertions made in these books, while they may or may not be fictitious, were certainly representative of the overwhelming evidence coming out of the nunneries and the monasteries of the Roman Catholic Church. So the author can argue all he wants, but the truth is well, irrefutable. Now, more damaging than the pamphlets and books were the preachers who spewed anti-Catholic rhetoric. Perhaps the most famous and egregious of these was Lyman Beecher. Lyman Beecher, a fiery New England Calvinist who moved his family to Cincinnati, Ohio in 1832, the same year Charles Carroll passed away in Maryland. Beecher was already well known by the time he moved west. Several of his children would eventually become even more famous than he, including Lyman's daughter, Harriet Beecher Stowe, future author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Beecher's move to Cincinnati was prompted by his belief that the moral destiny, the quote-unquote moral destiny of the nation, would be decided in the West. At the time, West meant primarily the Ohio Valley, where both natives and immigrants, including some Catholics, were starting to settle. The future of America must be saved from Catholics and infidels, preached Beecher. His 21-year-old son, Henry Ward Beecher, who later became famous, then infamous as a Brooklyn minister, warned in a Cincinnati newspaper that the Pope was intentionally sending Catholics to America to extend his power. And he was absolutely correct. He says the younger Beecher admonished native-born Protestants to, quote, arouse themselves and shake off the drowsy stupor that has long blinded their eyes to the fact that Catholics are assuming a stand prejudicial to the liberties of our country, unquote. How are Catholics naturally prejudicial against the liberties of our country? Because they serve first and foremost the papacy. And in popery, the people have no liberty. They must believe and do as the church says. The Pope is King of Kings and Lord of Lords over their lives. And a country is not is only a de facto government. A country's government is a de facto government unless it has, well, the Pope's best interests at heart. It has to have close political and spiritual ties to the Vatican in order to be considered a de jure government. All right? So, Catholics flooding into the country, trying to Catholicize, sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? No, it was conspiracy. Fact. Catholics, by the hundreds of thousands, were flooding into this country. So much so that it aroused the suspicion of Protestants. Now, we're all taught to believe those days are long gone. People move freely about the world. But look, we're having trouble closing that border with the South. Okay? Texas, Arizona, California, New Mexico, all of them. They're complaining. People flooding into the country. They're illegal. In a time of war, it would be called an invasion. But see, we're conditioned by the mainstream media to just call it illegal immigration. Okay? If the Ruskies ever come, I wonder if they'll call that an illegal immigration. See, American people are led around by their noses. Whatever terms they use on the mainstream media, we use it. Okay? And it conditions our brains. And we've repeated the mantra so many times that we can't look at the flood of Roman Catholics coming across the Mexican border and think anything having to do with religion. Why, it's illegal immigration. You might start by recognizing it as an invasion, okay? And from that point, then maybe you can, by leaps and bounds, you might be able to come to the reasonable conclusion, the historical conclusion, the factual conclusion, and I say even the prophetic conclusion that it is all about religion. It's all about making America Catholic. And it's couched in all these other terms to cover that very important secret. Rome's never changed. If she's going to make America Catholic, she has to beat the Protestants in the polls and elect Catholics to high office. Catholics who will pass laws commensurate with Roman Catholic canon law, and to eventually enslave the people to the government, and the government then serves the papacy and rules with a rod of Roman iron. It's not difficult to conceive because it's happened repeatedly all over the world since the rise of the papacy. But since that history has been hidden from Protestants, they no longer suspect anything having to do with religion through immigration. The Protestants knew who the Antichrist was, the papacy. And if the papacy is behind the flood of Roman Catholics coming to this country, well, it's not rocket science, is what I'm trying to say. Now, this author and many other Roman Catholic critics that I've heard from time to time suggest that this is all conspiracy theory, that this is the age-old Protestant mantra. The Pope's trying to take over America. Roman Catholics are not citizens of the American government. They're citizens of Rome. And they're commissioned by the Pope to help make America Catholic. But since liberty is the first thing to go when the Catholics get control of the government, then we simply have to ask ourselves, are we losing our liberties? Do the people still have a say in government? Do you get redress from grievances by the government? Do you have freedom to travel? Can the Pope come in, representatives and police come in your house at 3 a.m. in the morning and take you prisoner and hold you captive without legal representation and hold you there indefinitely? Those are presidential orders, okay? Presidential directives. They suspend the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States of America. The evidence is overwhelming. I could spend the rest of the program demonstrating to you, item by item, how Protestantism, that is liberty, has been curtailed. We're living in a police state. It used to be your communications were private. Well, there's no privacy anymore. The government has access to everything you do and say on the internet, on your telephone, even in typewritten letters. I'm not going to take the rest of the program to delineate all of the liberties that have been destroyed by this papist government. I'll let experience teach you how much liberty you've lost because of Roman Catholic immigration, Roman Catholic elevation to the most powerful positions in American government. And maybe you'll understand the significance, the very important significance of not only is there a controlling majority of Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court, much more important than that, there's not one single Protestant on the court. Since they're the ones who interpret the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it's in their hands how they interpret that Constitution, how your rights are defined. In Roman Catholic canon law, all rights proceed from the Pope, and he may give rights and he may take them away. Remember when the Pope crowned Charlemagne? It was strategic. Charlemagne hoped to gain a whole lot of respect and power and prestige by having the Pope place the crown upon his head, but he never bargained that since the Pope put it on his head, he might be able to take it away. That's Roman Catholic canon law. Whatever you take from the Pope, he can take it away. Just like whatever you take from the government. Benefits, licenses, the government can take them away. See? The beast and the woman that rides it. The Roman Catholic Church and the government. All right. Chapter 4 of the book is entitled Pio Nono and the Turning Point. Pio Nono is Latin for Pius IX. Pope Pius IX. It begins with a quote from E.E.Y. Hales. It says, if with Shakespeare we were to choose for our title the suffering tragic hero, then the middle of the century would be called the age of Pio Nono. Okay, one of the most powerful popes in history, one of the Jesuit popes. This one was Jesuit trained. So this is going to be an interesting chapter in the book. The man known to the world as Pio Nono arrived in Rome in the late spring of 1846 on a current of optimism. Optimism, because when you're at the bottom, you've got no place to look but up, right? The papacy was literally, handcuffed and disgraced because of the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution. Now, he says, since the death of Pope Pius VII in 1823, the papacy had been filled by popes who ruled the church and its terrestrial domains, with iron-fisted orthodoxy. Kind of reminds you of a prophecy in Daniel about the 2 iron legs. Yep, that's it. Now, each of the popes, Leo XII, Pius VIII, and Gregory XVI, had lived through the terrible years of French Revolution and the indignities of Napoleon. As a result, their reflexive response was to reject anything hinting of liberty or reform. The least of these, Gregory XVI, despised newness so intensely that he banned railroads in the Papal States. By the time Gregory died in 1846, the College of Cardinals was ready for a change. I find that amusing because, the Roman Catholic Church says that the Holy Spirit elects the Pope. But here's a candid Roman Catholic author who admits it's the College of Cardinals, and they were ready for a change, right? Now, the conclave chose Gregory's successor after just 2 days of deliberation. You talk about the fast track to Antichrist, that's it. 2 days to decide who was going to be the next Antichrist. He says the new pope's given name was Giovanni Mastai Ferretti. Okay, Giovanni Ferretti. For his papal appellation, he took the name Pope Pius IX in honor of Pope Pius VII, the Pope held captive by Napoleon. In Italian, Pius IX translates as Pio Nono. The Italian version resonated so well that the rest of the world soon adopted it. Pope Pius IX was neither as brilliant nor as erudite as some of his predecessors, but he was widely admired for his industry, charity, good humor, and most notably, his moderately liberal views. He was also, at 54, a relative youngster among popes when he assumed the throne of St. Peter. An infant during the height of the French Revolution, he had not been seared by the fires of Paris. He seemed a just man, to move the church beyond the difficulties of the past and find an accommodation with the fast-changing political and economic landscape of the mid-19th century Europe. So a transition pope, we'll hear more about Pio Nono, as he was known, right after these messages. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do Internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. If you would like to contact me, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. And if you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue on First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Back to Pope Pio Nino, as he was sometimes called in the United States. Pio Nono for those Roman Catholics, Italians, and others. I call him Antichrist, and he'll answer to all three. It says the first months of Pius IX's reign were exuberant and hopeful. In contrast to the reserved and severe, and I would add the word conservative, pontiffs of recent years, Pius was a natural bon vivant who hosted garden parties, loved to laugh, enjoyed an occasional pinch of snuff, and conversing with women. His humanity only added to his esteem among Italians. He was a pope, yes, but he was also a man of the world, a man of the people. I would call him the man of sin. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the one who deceiveth the whole world. The papacy is nothing but what the people grant him. He has no authority whatsoever from God. His power comes from Satan. He is on this earth to tempt and to try God's people. Will you pass the test? Or will you allow his mark to be upon you? That's the question. Pope Pius IX immediately undertook a number of reforms to modernize the papacy. Mainly, these reforms pertain to the governance of the papal states. The papal states were the terrestrial patrimony, the patrimony of Peter, it's called, held by popes since the domain of Pepin in the 8th century. This is what the papal states were created to help support financially the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy. And it made the Pope a king, a governor. And of course, the papacy has been in the process of extending his kingly domains to global status. Okay, he'd conquered Europe prior to the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution, and seemed for a moment to be dead, but has been reborn and is now alive and establishing a global government. That's the New World Order. Now, he says by the mid-19th century, they included about 16,000 square miles of land, a sizable portion of central Italy, covering Romagna, Marche, Umbria, and Lazio. The city of Rome, too, remained under the rule of the papacy, as it had been, with occasional interruptions, for centuries. These combined territories made the Pope a temporal sovereign, as well as a spiritual leader, king and priest. This duality was the problem with the Papal States. Listen to this. Popes had tended not to be very good temporal rulers. Popes had tended not to be very good temporal rulers. Poor administration and draconian, that is Roman Catholic canon laws, combined to produce resentment and poverty in the Papal States. And we're going to allow this jerk to rule the whole world. You know, here this author is admitting the popes were bad temporal rulers. They had draconian laws, poor administration, and poverty was the identifying characteristic of the Papal States. But our Roman Catholic politicians in Washington are helping to elevate him to global status. And the United States doesn't see anything wrong with that, because there's no protest anymore. Nobody seems to know who the Antichrist is anymore. Believing in a fiction, a Jesuit fiction, a future Antichrist that hasn't set foot on terra firma yet. That's a product of Jesuit casuistry and sophistry and downright lies, twisting the scriptures to deceive God's people. We bit the bait. Now it's time for us to get back on the Protestant wagon and destroy this idea of a future Antichrist in a future 7-year period of time when the Bible was speaking about Jesus Christ and his 7-year ministry on this earth. That's basic ground. Look, if you believe in a future Antichrist, as the Jesuits have taught us, about Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, 26, and 27, when Daniel chapter 9, verse 26 and 27 was talking about the coming of the Messiah, the precise time of the coming of the Messiah and his 7-year ministry, if you believe that is incorrect and is speaking about a future Antichrist and 7 years of great tribulation, you've just plain rejected Jesus as the Messiah. Indirectly, but that's the ultimate aim of that false teaching. That's the ultimate aim of futurism. To deny that Jesus was the fulfillment of it. And to present to the world a false Christ. That's the whole purpose of futurism. I hope my listeners will take some time and read Daniel chapter 9, particularly verses 23 through 27, and ask yourself the question throughout: what single part of this prophecy did not Jesus Christ himself fulfill completely and perfectly 2,000 years ago? And then ask yourself, what is the motive of twisting that simple prophecy into some future gobbledygook that has been gobbled up by all the grotesquely apostate churches? And then stop to realize that that belief, as prolific and uniformly taught in the churches today is, that opened the door for ecumenical reunion with the Roman Catholic Church. They call it interreligious dialogue. It goes by all kinds of different words, different descriptions. But that's what it is, to bring Protestants who no longer protest the papacy because they believe in a future Antichrist, to bring them back under the temporal and spiritual authority of the papacy. And since Vatican Council II and the Protestants recapitulated, Rome walks into Washington, D.C. with a mandate carrying the memberships of all Roman Catholics and the documents of Vatican Council II into Washington, D.C. and say, now we represent not just the card-carrying Catholics, but also the ecumenical evangelibellies. And we have a political mandate. We want Catholics on the Supreme Court. We want Catholics in Congress. We want Catholics in the Senate. We want, well, we tried a Catholic president. We had to take him out. But we need a Catholic in the White House, and he can profess any religion he wants as long as he obeys us. Okay? Whether he does it through our pressure or whether he does it willingly, we don't care, but he must respond to the papacy. And that's the status quo now. They still answer to Rome. And this Pope is telling us this duality, this king and priest, the Pope being a temporal ruler was a problem with the papal states. Popes had tended not to be very good temporal rulers. Now, it stands to reason if the papacy's not a very good temporal ruler, if he picks all the temporal rulers in the United States of America, we're not going to have a very good government, are we? No, indeed. Do you think the government's good? Don't answer that. Popes had tended not to be very good temporal rulers. Poor administration and draconian laws combined to produce resentment and poverty in the papal states, which in turn undermined the position of the church as a paragon of spiritual charity, a spirituality and charity. It was that, popes were such bad rulers that it was giving the church a bad name. Okay? Pope Pius IX seemed determined to change this. Okay? He introduced a constitutional framework that allowed lay people greater representation in local politics. Politics is always the name of the game for the popes. He granted amnesty to more than 1,000 political prisoners. Did you know there were over 1,000 political prisoners just in the papal states? There was rebellion in the papal states against the government by the Pope. They weren't good rulers at all. He says he relaxed restrictions on the press and ended some obnoxious burdens imposed on Roman Jews and by previous popes, such as exclusion to walled ghettos. There's the liberty that the Roman Catholic Church loves to talk about. They relegated Jews to walled ghettos and required attendance at weekly, quote-unquote, Christian sermons when they were Roman Catholic sermons, never to be confused with Christian sermons, not ever confused with Christian sermons. Okay? Jews had a choice. You either get baptized in the Roman Catholic Church or you go to the ghetto. So much liberty, see? The Roman Catholic Church has a doctrine that since the Jews killed Christ, they're Christ killers. And they've been replaced in the world. God has replaced them. With whom? Why, the Pope, of course, and the Roman Catholic Church. So the papacy has taken a historical position of persecution, torment, torture, forced, coerced conversion to the Roman Catholic Church, or else. That has always been the position of the Roman Catholic Church. It's still the position of the Roman Catholic Church. And you can think of the modern nation state of Israel as a giant ghetto for the Jews. That's why there's no peace in Israel. That's why there'll not be any peace in Israel until the Prince of Peace comes. Okay? There's not going to be any peace for the Jews. There was never intended to be peace for the Jews. Israel was created by the Vatican. Israel was occupied by Jews because of Roman Catholic persecution in Europe. The very persecution this author admits. That's why they live in Israel. It's intolerable to live anywhere else. And the Pope has a plan. The papacy has a plan commensurate with its replacement theology. It's either going to forcibly convert those Jews to Roman Catholicism through its government, or they're going to be annihilated, and they can go either direction. All this talk about peace in Israel is the biggest pipe dream. It's the biggest lie, and people buy it like you wouldn't believe. Look, I got a question to ask you. I grew up in the Protestant churches in this country, Baptist church mostly. Pentecostal churches when I was younger, a Baptist church when I was older. They all love Israel. They all love the Jews. They all want to see them get saved, and they're all wanting to support Israel. What do they want the Israelites to do? Well, they want them to build a temple. When Jesus said God no longer dwells in temples made with hands, they want them to begin animal sacrifices again when the blood of lambs and goats never washed away sin. Do you see the abject apostasy of the Christian churches in this country? I love the Jews, absolutely, genuinely love the Jews. If it weren't for the Jews, God picking the Israelitish people, they're the ones who brought us the oracles of God. This Bible that we have, we cherish, we read, we study, we depend upon its author. It was brought to us by the Jews. We want to provoke them to jealousy for our God. But they're never going to be given our God in Israel. Not unless God himself reveals himself to them and exposes the deception that the world has placed upon the Jews. Salvation is of the Lord. And to the degree that Protestants, Bible believers in this country, have been apostatized by futurism, have been ecumenized by the ecumenical movement, I see little hope. I see little hope for God to be able to use Protestants effectively. And I believe there may come a time when God will abandon the ecumenical evangelibellies and reveal himself once again to his people. And their eyes will be open. But for the most part, the Jews in Israel are destined to accept an earthly king, one counterfeiting Christ. And that is my fear. And none of it would have been possible without futurism and Vatican Council II, and the uniting of all the so-called Christian religions together in support of this modern nation state of Israel. Anyway, I could continue with that, but I won't. He granted amnesty to more than 1,000 political prisoners. He relaxed restrictions on the press and ended some obnoxious burdens. Did you know the Pope's always controlled the press before? Yeah. Under Roman Catholic canon law, you may not think, do, or say, or communicate by writing anything contrary to the Pope. Now, to put that into practice, he had to have control of the press. And he did have control of the press. That's why it was illegal to print the Bible in the common language of the people so that they could read it and understand it for themselves. The papacy has always had control of the press. To say that the papacy is not control of the press today is to ignore all of history. You love freedom of the press? The papacy hates the freedom of the press. Oh, it loves the freedom of the press so long as the press is free to print propaganda. Papal propaganda. But if the press ever starts objectively analyzing world events and starts showing the world the Roman, the papal hand in it all, then the Pope is going to be toast. That's why it is essential for the papacy to have control of the press through cooperative third parties, the Knights of Malta. High-ranking press officials are Knights of Malta. They swear their oath which is very similar to the extreme oath of the Jesuits that hopefully you read this weekend. And they feed you the information you get. It's all groomed. And if on occasion a rare event takes place and is reported in the press that sheds negative light, it's immediately squelched, and then new facts come forward to gloss over the whole thing. The active manipulation of the press. The press is just another name for propaganda, papal propaganda. I don't watch television. I don't listen to the news. I get my information from God's people. Okay, he relaxed restrictions on the press and ended some obnoxious burdens imposed on Roman Jews by previous popes, such as exclusion to walled ghettos and required attendance at weekly Christian sermons. He brought gas lighting to the streets of Rome, welcomed modern ideas in education and agriculture, and allowed construction of railroads Pope Gregory VI had so despised. So initially, this pope was very liberal, okay? But he was Jesuit trained. This is all a facade. This pope turned Tridentine. He turned Council of Trent. He turned arch-conservative by the end of his papacy. He was controlled by the Jesuits, okay? Remember, it was the Council of Trent that established the Counter-Reformation. This pope became Counter-Reformation. And this pope is the one who published the Syllabus of Error and the encyclical Quanta Cura. And in between those two were damned all the tenets of Protestantism. Okay? And all the tenets of Republican government. So the Pope has to appear to be a liberal to start with. And he says not everyone approved the Pope's reforms. Among Pius IX's most vocal detractors was Prince Metternich of Austria. Remember, he was one of the papal monarchs. He was an arch-conservative. As a matter of fact, it was Prince Metternich that came to the rescue of the popes during the Italian Revolution. And it was during that Italian Revolution where the Italians were ready to throw off the yoke of the papacy, throw off the yoke of the monarchical system of the popes, and to adopt their own constitution and their own president. And it was Metternich that came to Italy to overthrow that republican form of government and to reestablish papal dictation over the Italian people. And it was during that time that American Roman Catholics exposed their true blood. American Roman Catholics, especially in the big cities of the East, organized campaigns to help finance the papal resistance against the republican form of government in Italy. They demanded that it was the heritage of the popes, the patrimony of Peter, for him to be able to rule all of Italy. And of course, when American Roman Catholics who stand up powerfully and organize campaigns to help finance Metternich's army and to help establish papal authority, reestablish papal authority in Italy, and to overthrow the popularly elected government of Italy, Protestant eyes were awakened. Protestants saw this and knew exactly. Look, if they will help to restore papal monarchism, popery over the Italians, surely, if given an opportunity, they would impose papal tyranny upon Americans. And so they outed themselves, ignorantly outed themselves to American Protestants. Protestants who may formally have believed that Catholics were good American patriots. They were loyal to our government, they fought the Revolutionary War, and they were not to be suspected. But when they saw the organized activities of Roman Catholics in this country defending the Pope and defending his tyranny in Italy, well, then Protestantism was revived in the United States. He says not everyone approved of Pope Pius IX's reforms. Among them were vocal detractors was Prince Metternich, the arch-conservative foreign minister of the Austrian Empire and architect of post-Napoleon Europe. Architect of post-Napoleon. Napoleon could be marked by irreligion, okay? Anarchy, humanism, all of it. And Prince Metternich was going to restore papal monarchism. That was his goal. Okay. Among Pius IX's most vocal detractors was Prince Metternich, the arch-conservative foreign minister of the Austrian Empire and architect of post-Napoleon Europe, who dismissed the Pope as, quote, warm of heart and weak of intellect, unquote. Heck of a way to talk about his own Pope, isn't it? Warm of heart, weak of intellect. It's as though God wasn't smart enough to put a smart man in the papacy, right? See how much they really venerate the popes. Roman Catholics, as a rule, they pay deference to the papacy, but whenever there's a direct relationship, they loathe the popes. It says, to Metternich, a liberal pope was an oxymoron, destined to fall upon his own contradictions. For the moment, though, the popular reaction remained mostly adulatory, not only in Italy, but of all Europe. Pius IX was praised as a hero of reform at a moment when social and economic revolutions were occurring throughout the world. The United States was not immune to the excitement surrounding the new pope. Given their own positive experience with democracy and independence, Americans generally supported the Pope's transformations and his apparent embrace of liberal ideas. Liberal equates to suspension of papal authority and giving the people a little more liberty and a little more authority in government. Okay, that's the way you should view this. And he says Pope Pius IX's greatest fans included prominent American Protestants whose ancestors had despised all things papist or Romish. Charles Edwards Lester, author and ordained Presbyterian minister, the grandson of Calvinist preacher John Edwards, declared Pius, quote, listen to this blasphemy, the man heaven seemed to have chosen to lead the human race out of the house of bondage, unquote. This Presbyterian minister, a Protestant, qualifying this Pope as equivalent to our Moses. You see, the spirit of Vatican Council II came early in American life, didn't it? Romanization of the United States of America. We've come to the end of the program. We'll continue with our reading of this most excellent book, The Global Vatican. Come back tomorrow.